Sometimes sports feel trivial. We get so caught up in matches, rankings, who won and who lost, that we forget there's a whole world happening outside the lines of a tennis court. And then something happens that puts everything into perspective. For Carlos Alcaraz, competing thousands of miles away at the Australian Open, that moment came when news of the devastating Adamz train accident reached him in Melbourne. What he did next shows exactly the kind of person he is, both as an athlete and as a human being. After his second-round victory, instead of just celebrating his win, he took a marker to the television camera lens and wrote a simple but powerful message of support for the victims back home in Spain. The Adamz accident is absolutely heartbreaking. We're talking about one of the worst train disasters Spain has seen in over a decade. On Sunday evening, January 18th, a high-speed train traveling from Malaga to Madrid derailed near the town of Adamz in Córdoba province. But it wasn't just a derailment. The train crossed onto the opposite track and collided head-on with another train coming from Madrid to Huelva. The impact was catastrophic. The death toll has risen to at least 42 people, with nearly 300 injured, many of them critically. Entire families were torn apart in an instant. The front carriages of both trains were twisted beyond recognition, with rescue workers having to cut through mangled metal to reach survivors trapped inside. Spain declared 3 days of national mourning. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez canceled his trip to the World Economic Forum in Davos to visit the crash site. King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia also went to Adamz to meet with rescue workers and show solidarity with the victims' families. The whole country is grieving, and in the middle of all this national tragedy, Carlos Alcaraz, competing at the Australian Open on the other side of the world, wanted to do something. He wanted his fellow Spaniards to know that even though he's far away, he's thinking about them. After defeating German player Yannick Hanfmann in his second-round match, Alcaraz did what he's seen countless tennis players do before him. He approached the television camera. But instead of writing something celebratory or signing autographs for fans, he wrote in Spanish, "Mucho ánimo con lo que está pasando en España." For those who don't speak Spanish, that translates roughly to "stay strong with what's happening in Spain," or "much courage for what's happening in Spain." It's a phrase that carries so much weight, so much empathy, so much genuine care for people who are suffering. In his post-match press conference, Alcaraz explained why he felt compelled to send that message. He said that even though they're in Australia, they're aware of what's happening back home. He wanted to show support for the families and for those who have lost loved ones in the tragedy. And then he said something really touching. He mentioned that on the camera lens, he couldn't write much and didn't know how to make his message understood properly. That vulnerability, that concern about whether his gesture would be enough, that's what makes it so genuine. He wasn't doing it for publicity or because someone told him to. He was doing it because he genuinely cares. Think about the position Alcaraz is in. He's the world #1 in tennis right now. He's at one of the 4 most important tournaments of the year, competing against the best players on the planet. His mind should probably be focused entirely on his next match, his strategy, his physical conditioning, all the things that champions need to think about to stay at the top. But instead, he's thinking about people back home who are suffering. He's thinking about families who will never be whole again. He's thinking about children who lost parents, parents who lost children, and communities that are shattered by grief. The Adamz tragedy has details that make it even more heartbreaking. There's a 6-year-old girl who somehow survived the crash with barely any injuries, just 3 stitches in her head, but she lost her parents, her brother, and a cousin in the accident. She was found barefoot on the train tracks after escaping through a broken window. Local residents are calling her survival a miracle, but she's now an orphan because of this disaster. When you hear stories like that, it puts everything into perspective. Tennis matches suddenly seem incredibly unimportant compared to the real suffering happening in the world. What makes Alcaraz's gesture particularly meaningful is that it's not performative. He wasn't making a big production out of it. He didn't hold a press conference specifically to talk about the tragedy. He just quietly wrote his message on the camera lens, a tradition in tennis where players often write thank you messages or dedications. But his dedication wasn't to a sponsor or a personal achievement, it was to people who are hurting. That simplicity and sincerity is what makes it resonate so much with people who are watching. The investigation into what caused the Adamz accident is still ongoing. Transport Minister Oscar Puente described it as tremendously strange because it happened on a straight section of track that had been recently renovated with significant investment. The trains weren't speeding, and all the safety systems were supposedly functioning properly. Early investigations suggest it might have been a faulty rail weld, but nobody knows for certain yet. What we do know is that around 500 people were on those two trains combined, and in a matter of seconds, dozens of lives were ended, and hundreds more were changed forever. Spain's high-speed rail network is actually one of the most extensive and advanced in the world. It's the second longest network globally, behind only China. For decades, these trains have been a source of national pride, a safe, efficient, comfortable way to travel across the country. The last major accident was in 2013 in Santiago de Compostela, where 79 people died. That was caused by excessive speed. But this Adamz accident is different and in many ways more terrifying because it happened under conditions where everything should have been safe. It's made people question whether they can trust the system they've relied on for so long. For Alcaraz, being away from Spain during this tragedy must be difficult. Athletes at his level spend so much time traveling, competing in different countries, living out of suitcases and hotel rooms. They miss birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, all in pursuit of their professional goals. But when something this serious happens at home, that distance becomes even more pronounced. You want to be there, you want to help somehow, but you're stuck on the other side of the world with a job to do. So you do what you can, even if it's just writing a few words on a camera lens. The reaction to Alcaraz's message has been overwhelmingly positive in Spain. People appreciate that he took the time to acknowledge what's happening. Social media has been full of comments thanking him for remembering the victims and their families. In times of national tragedy, these small gestures of solidarity matter more than you might think. They remind people that they're not alone in their grief, that others are thinking about them, that the tragedy hasn't been forgotten just because there are other things happening in the world. It's worth noting that Alcaraz isn't the only Spanish athlete or public figure who has expressed condolences and support for the Adamz victims. Real Madrid players observed a moment of silence during training. Politicians across the political spectrum have expressed their grief and pledged support for the investigation and for the victims' families. But there's something particularly touching about seeing a young athlete in the middle of his own professional challenges, taking a moment to reach out to people who are suffering. This also speaks to Alcaraz's character more broadly. He's known for being humble, grounded, and genuinely kind despite his enormous success at such a young age. He hasn't let fame go to his head. He still remembers where he comes from, still cares about his community and his country, still recognizes that being in the public eye gives him a platform that he can use for good. That's not something you can teach someone. That's either in your character or it isn't, and clearly it's in Carlos's. The timing of his message is also significant. He delivered it after his second round match, which means he's still fairly early in the tournament. He's got a long way to go if he wants to win the Australian Open. Every match from here on out gets progressively more difficult. The mental focus required to compete at that level is intense. And yet, he made sure to acknowledge what's happening back home before moving forward with his tournament. That's the mark of someone who understands that life is bigger than tennis. In his press conference, Alcaraz also talked about changes he's made to his serve and his mental approach to the game. He mentioned how he's adjusted his behavior, how he talks to himself, how he deals with difficult moments in matches. These are all important aspects of being a professional athlete. But then he pivoted to talk about the Adamz tragedy, and you could hear in his voice that this was what really mattered to him in that moment. The tennis stuff was just tennis stuff. The tragedy was real life, real pain, real loss. There's a long history of athletes using their platforms to address social issues, tragedies, and important causes. We've seen it in every sport, from basketball players wearing shirts with social justice messages, to soccer players taking a knee, to tennis players speaking out about various issues. But what Alcaraz did feels different somehow. It wasn't political, it wasn't controversial, it was just pure human compassion. It was one person acknowledging the suffering of others and trying, in his own small way, to offer comfort. The families of the victims will likely never forget the support they've received from across Spain and from around the world. Messages like Alcaraz's might seem small in the grand scheme of things. A few words on a camera lens aren't going to bring back lost loved ones or heal physical injuries, but they do provide emotional support. They remind people in their darkest moments that others care, that they're being thought about, that they matter. And sometimes, that's all you can offer. The Adamz accident has raised serious questions about rail safety in Spain and across Europe. How could something like this happen on a supposedly safe, well-maintained track? Were there warning signs that were missed? Could this tragedy have been prevented? These are questions that investigators will be working to answer in the coming weeks and months. The Spanish government has promised a thorough investigation, and there will likely be changes to safety protocols as a result. But right now, in the immediate aftermath, the focus is on helping survivors, supporting families, and honoring those who died. Alcaraz's tennis career will continue. He'll play his third-round match and hopefully many more after that. He's got a long career ahead of him, more Grand Slams to potentially win, more records to break. But this moment, this simple gesture of writing a message of support on a camera lens, this will be remembered too. Not because it was flashy or dramatic, but because it was human. Because it showed that even in the middle of pursuing his own dreams and goals, he hasn't forgotten about the people who are struggling. The phrase mucho ánimo that Alcaraz used is interesting when you really think about it. It's encouraging people to have courage, to stay strong, to not give up in the face of terrible adversity. That's what Spain needs right now. The country is mourning, grieving, trying to make sense of a senseless tragedy. And here's their young tennis champion competing on the world stage, telling them to stay strong. It's a message that resonates precisely because it comes from someone who embodies that strength and courage in his own professional life. Looking ahead, the recovery from this tragedy will take a long time. The physical injuries will heal eventually. The trains will be cleared, the tracks will be repaired, and service will resume. But the emotional and psychological scars will last much longer. Families will grieve for years. Survivors will deal with trauma. Communities will remember this day forever. And in some small way, knowing that people like Carlos Alcaraz are thinking about them, are sending them messages of support, might help just a little bit. Alcaraz will continue his Australian Open campaign, carrying with him the weight of knowing what's happening back home. Every time he steps onto the court, he'll probably think about those families, about that little girl who survived but lost everything, about the rescue workers who worked through the night pulling people from twisted metal. And maybe that perspective will change how he approaches his tennis. Maybe it'll make the pressure of a big match seem less overwhelming. Maybe it'll remind him that at the end of the day, it's just a game, and there are much more important things in life. But that doesn't mean his tennis doesn't matter. In fact, in times like these, sports can provide a welcome distraction, a moment of joy or excitement in the middle of sadness. The Spanish tennis fans who are moved watching Alcaraz and Heat in Australia Open might give them a big respite from the pain. And knowing that he's thinking about them, that he's carrying their flag, not just literally, but emotionally, that adds another layer of meaning to his performance. The Adamz tragedy is a reminder that life is fragile and unpredictable. People got on those trains expecting to arrive at their destinations safely. They were probably thinking about mundane things: what they'd have for dinner, whether they remembered to lock their front door, what they needed to do when they got home. And then, in an instant, everything changed. For some, their lives ended. For others, their lives will never be the same. It's a sobering reminder to appreciate what we have while we have it, to tell people we love them, to not take anything for granted. Alcaraz's message won't change the reality of what happened. It won't bring people back or erase the trauma. But it does matter. It matters to the people who saw it, who felt seen and remembered in their grief. It matters as an example of using your platform for good, of being more than just an athlete. And it matters as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there are people who care, who are thinking about us, who want us to stay strong. So, as Carlos Alcaraz continues his journey through the Australian Open, win or lose, he's already shown what really counts. He's shown that being a champion isn't just about winning matches or rankings or trophies. It's about how you carry yourself, how you treat others, how you use your influence. It's about remembering that behind every news story, there are real people with real pain. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply acknowledge that pain and say, "I see you, I'm thinking about you, stay strong." That's exactly what Alcaraz did, and that's why his message, as simple as it was, resonated so deeply with so many people.